Thank you, Jamie. That was the most enthusiastic I've ever seen you at this album.
I know.
Anyway, thank you so much.
I'll still be drunk from last night.
Maybe. Thank you so much for joining us on the Skeptic Track here at DragonCon 2024. We're back! So this is definitely the diehard audience. We love you guys so much. So you'll be familiar with some of our panelists today. We have Kurt Anderson, who is a destroyer of frying pans and card decks.
And I bent it back.
No bending it back. So Nick Eftimiades, who's the destroyer of governments and conspiracies worldwide. John Mendez, we are just delighted to have this year. I've been a fan of her videos for years on disguise. And she is the destroyer of your illusions of what's real. Jamie Swiss is the destroyer of complacency, and Margaret Downey is the builder of all coalitions. So welcome to our panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Oh, you get some water? Can we have some water, please? Oh, yeah. Thanks. So, anyway, welcome to the Skeptic Track. Let's hear about y'all's new projects. What's going on this year? Kurt, I know you're getting your PhD in skepticism, and talk to us, please.
Hopefully getting my
Okay,
PhD.
fair. It's not
I'm
fair.
working on it. Right?
Fair.
There's a lot to it. So, brief rundown, professional magician for years. COVID made me instantly unemployed. Went back to school because I was doing a guest lecture in the lying deception class in a local college. Ran into one of the world's foremost experts in that field from an academic standpoint of human communication. Got funded to do my master's, still under COVID, and then accepted an offer to be fully funded and a couple additional fundings to do my PhD. So I am working on being a research scientist, do a few shows here and there, come to Skeptics Track. I was telling Angie, I feel like I'm the new guy still, and then I realized I've been doing this here for like, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, and I'm not like a rookie behind the mic here. So glad to be here, but I'm more thankful that you're here.
Thanks. Nick and Jonna, y'all used to work together.
So we did.
Let's talk about that.
Will they come after us?
They will not let you leave this room until you talk about it.
Yeah, so that's what it's just hit you out of left field, so to speak. So I spent 34 years in the Intel community, starting my career in '84 at CIA, in the same area, I mean literally the same area closely where Jonna worked. So we kind of grew up together, for a bit in the agency, and it was, I guess, worked on some things back and forth. So an extraordinary experience, and now decades later, I mean, it's been like 40 years since we've seen each other. And I worked for Tony, which is always sad about, but he was, how do you put it? Like he was up there, way on top, and sort of leadership and
Tony
really,
Mendez.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
yeah,
Tony
please.
Mendez.
Yeah, he's the guy that the character in Argo is.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Basically.
Argo, played by Ben Affleck.
And we're going to have a talk about that later. I'm sorry, Nick. I just wanted to make sure I got a plug into y'all's talk later.
Yeah, I think that's tomorrow. And so, long story made short, we had done a lot of operational stuff together. We've done a lot of training stuff together. We worked together, and then I sort of moved on into other areas of the Intel community. So it's personally a little bit of a shocker in doing this. I've been here about 12 years now. This past year for me has been a lot of traveling, which is actually, I wasn't planning on coming this year just because it's been insane. I've been in at least a dozen countries over the summer. I've been, for the past 3 months, 2.5, 2 months I've been traveling, and traveling, in 2 weeks again. So it's been a crazy time. I do a lot of work in training foreign governments, and as well as being a full-time professor at Penn State University. So in Homeland Security. So that's been my life. It's just, I'm actually looking for an off-ramp. And it's just been a little too crazy. And I'm sure everyone knows, some aspect of that in their own life. Life gets so busy that you just can't stop and look down. But I'm trying to come off that. So that's been my life. Some publications coming out in the not too distant future, mostly on Chinese intelligence and organized crime.
Jonna.
You kind of had to be here when Nick and I met each other again this morning after 40 years, we think, a long time ago. And we didn't really recognize each other. We both looked entirely different. It was a lot of fun.
Well, you're the director of disguise.
I was the head of disguise when I left CIA. I was many things before that. I was there 27 years, started as a secretary, went into photo operations, and spent about 12, 13 years doing that. Went to the subcontinent, fell in love with that part of the world. The only way for me to get back was to train in disguise, which I did. And then when I left, I was chief of disguise, and it was a very, very interesting career. I've written a book about it called In True Face. I have a copy of it lying here, but I'm not going to necessarily show it to you. And I'm just, like Nick, I've been traveling like crazy. There's been a book launch that's been 2 months long, still kind of going on. I'm looking forward to things calming down because there's another book in the works, and then I think I'm done. So this is my first time at this event, and I'm finding it just wonderfully electric and exciting to be here. And I mentioned to this group earlier that I've been to Comic-Con 3 times, and I love Comic-Con, but this is different, and this just really feels very, very good. I'm so looking forward to this conversation this morning. And Jamie, thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure, my friend.
I was about to give Jamie credit. Jamie is responsible for, and I mean, like, I love everybody, don't get me wrong, but I like squeed all over myself last night when I met Katie Coleman, the astronaut, who will be riding in my car during the parade. So y'all must, absolutely must come participate. And Margaret is going to talk more about that. Thank you so much, Jamie. I've been a fan of Jana's for years on her YouTube videos, and thank you so much for bringing them to us.
My pleasure. I knew it would be a natural fit for both of them. Both Katie and I have been friends for a very, very long time, and John and I met through the same conference, actually, that Katie and I originally met through something called the DEAD Conference, which is very different events. Sort of a small TED-type conference that I now work for as a programmer, but I met Jana there a few years ago when she was speaking. We had dinner the night before, and as you will learn as you attend Jana's talk, which I highly recommend to you, and my talk about spycraft today, and some panels we're going to be on together, including the Argo panel. As you will learn, she has deep and interesting background connections to magic, both she and her husband, Tony Mendez, again on the Argo story. So there's all these intersections of magic, and so we sort of hit it off over that subject matter instantly when we first met. We've become friends ever since, and it just seemed right. Katie, they both have new books. Katie has a wonderful new book as well, so I'm glad to have facilitated bringing them here to DragonCon. I knew they'd have a blast, and I knew they'd be a good fit.
She's also doing some stuff for the space track. So
Katie is, yes.
Yes.
So Katie's solo, she's doing a bunch of stuff, but her solo talk is this morning right after this at 11:30. That's great. I look completely mashed out in light.
It's the lighting. It's the lighting.
Yeah.
The wrinkles all go away.
Right. If all the world's a stage, I want better lighting.
I'm writing that one down.
So anyway, so her talk is 11:30. I recommend that to you as well. She's on the space track, but it's in this building, West Ballroom or whatever it is. And she's a delight. John is a delight. It's going to be fun. I'm delighted to be on panels with both of them here. And I guess I've talked about all of that, but just for anyone who doesn't know, so I'm a professional magician and writer, author of 6 books. And I consult other magicians and do all that, but I also have a long-standing career in the skeptic world, founding several regional organizations, New York City Skeptics, Washington, D.C., National Capital Area Skeptics, and I was a senior fellow to the James Randi Educational Foundation, where I helped to run the $1 Million Challenge, where we offered $1 million for any paranormal event demonstration that could be demonstrated under mutually agreed upon test conditions. No, we never paid the prize, but we tried. So anyway, that's my background, and most of my writing is about magic, but I have one book called Conjurer's Conundrum, which is about the historical intersection. A small book that's about the historical intersection between magic and skepticism and rational inquiry, which actually goes back 400 years in the literature, and then goes to famous debunkers and skeptics like Harry Houdini and the aforementioned James Randi, and it talks, half the book is about that history, and half the book is about my personal history and my various adventures going undercover investigating subjects. All that kind of fun stuff. So that's why I'm here, but mostly I hang out with her.
Yay! That's my favorite. Margaret, speaking of hanging out, my dear, she always stays at my house after and watches all the costumes and everything for the parade. But please, let's hear about you've got a lot of stuff going on though. Not just the parade, not just Dragon Con, you've got the Thomas Paine stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk.
Well, I just want to make sure that everyone knows we want you to participate in the parade this year. It is going to be our best parade ever, having 2 star cars, one for John Delancey and one for Katie Coleman. And we've got loads of costumes in the back. We can fit any size, hopefully, and we'd love to get our banner carriers especially costumed right away so that I don't have to worry, because without a banner, our parade entry is nothing. We have to lead off with a banner so that everyone knows who is a skeptic, including Katie Coleman and John Delancey, which will be behind the banner. So thank you so much, Angie, for arranging for your car to become a Barbie car to carry the astronaut. It's pink, it's gorgeous.
I'm Marriott Carpet Barbie today.
And is Chuck Miller in the audience? He actually took the time to find a convertible for John Delancey that looks kind of like a rocket ship. So that's perfect for him. So I'll just briefly tell you that it's my 3rd year of being president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, and we are building a memorial in Washington, D.C. The bill was passed a few years ago, signed by President Biden, and we are meeting with commissioners and the National Park Service on September 4th via Zoom and getting to get an authorization for Area 1, the most prestigious place in Washington, D.C. You can see me more for details. I have newsletters in the back, by the way, or just contact me, Thomas Paine Memorial Association, or the Free Thought Society. I've been an activist for 35 years, and the Free Thought Society has been a wonderful adventure for everybody. So please participate if you can.
That's so wonderful. Yay. And Margaret worked so hard. I mean, like this is a labor of love, but it is a labor. And so
But we couldn't do it without Angie. She lets us store all of the costumes at her house. She delivers them to this ballroom. I clean it all up. We get it back to Angie's. We do the wash. We reload.
I don't do a thing. She
No.
does it all.
But you can be guaranteed that all the costumes we have back there are fresh and clean.
Yep. So, so there's been kind of a lot of developments over the past several years since, so have y'all seeing any new trends in the skeptical community? Are we seeing more critical or less critical thinking? Has anyone noticed anything like that?
I've noticed a lot of cartoons are focusing on, young scientist brains being highlighted in cartoons. I've had a couple of children come by yesterday wanting to be in the parade and showing me their costume and saying, well, this is science. And I'm going to let them in, of course. That'd be great. So I've noticed different characters. Remember when the only scientist was Scooby-Doo? Well, now there's a lot more characters on TV for children, targeting children.
I'll go the other way with that. I was stunned at a recent survey, American kids between ages 13 and 17, #1 career, influencer. Same survey in China, #1 career, scientist. So,
Wow.
we have a panel, I think we're on a panel talking about critical thinking in academia, and I would say, and having had this discussion now with dozens of people, just actually in preparation for this weekend, And some people have also laid a lot of this at COVID as well, which I'm not sure. I still haven't reasoned that out in my head, and I have no facts to base it on. But I'm going to say the state of that type of critical thinking in American society as a whole is pretty poor.
So are we coming out of the, so you don't see us coming out of the bubble? Do you think that the COVID bubble insulated those entrenched sort of bad ideas
See,
longer?
that's what other people have contended. I'm not sure in my head I draw a direct correlation between that COVID bubble and the sort of lack of critical thinking that I've seen in society as a whole. But I would, and some people say social media, and a lot of reasons that social scientists look at that, or rather a lot of reasons that they come up with after looking at that. But the general sense I get is we're still at a point we have a lack of critical thinking, not only in society as a whole, but in the educational system.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, it is going to be hard to kind of sort out, but I don't think we're prepared for the media explanation of skepticism to keep up with like the non-skeptical viewpoint. The world is so divisive. It's always right. Like I don't want to sound like my dad. Like these kids these days, like it's the same thing. I was the moron that was going to destroy the world when I was 18. I get that. Like kids are smart. They're not going to destroy the world like my generation says. But what we've got is you got two people that have opposing points of view, and they're claiming the same reason and the same problem with the other person. And they both think the other person can't see that they're wrong. And so, one of the things, we have access to so much information on a very base level. And I guess, when you think critically and you think, okay, we're not just taking like one person's viewpoint or, one thing, there's so much more to it. We forget other people don't necessarily see it that way. So when scientifically, if somebody puts out a study that's like vastly different than everything else, everybody's gonna go, oh, okay, well they're right now, right? Somebody's gonna go back and they're gonna retry this. They're gonna look through their information. They're gonna see even if it got through peer review, and then it's got to be replicated. And then we do lots of more studies in lots of other contexts, and it's it may be years before we know. And so we saw this microcosm with COVID, and so the science wasn't exactly right, but it kept getting better. And everybody that was opposed points to the wrong and go, no, the scientists said this and they were clearly wrong. I don't have to believe them. Well, that's not how science works. Like, nobody in science, like we don't say we've proven gravity exists. We have the theory of gravity that gives us our best model to understand it. And so, like the way we think and discuss things has been adopted to take an exactly opposite point of view. And nobody's really kind of explaining that.
Please, yes, please.
Well, interesting you point that out, because I feel the exact same way, and I've always known about COVID. Had someone stood up and said, you know what, we're just starting to get this disease. We don't have all the answers. This is our best estimate from this point on, and that's going to change.
But they did say that, Nick. I think my comment to about COVID, to Kurt's point, is that people don't understand how, in a wide sense, how the scientific method actually works. And so what was happening, COVID was a perfect example of an excellent example, high quality example of science at work. And because the virus was new, the research was immediate, and the information and the conclusions, which all scientific conclusions are tentative,
right?
All, right? So the conclusions and the information were tentative and kept changing, and guess what? That's a feature, not a bug.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, that's what it's supposed to.
And so that's how it's supposed to work. And it's the same thing. I always cite cold fusion. If you remember the cold fusion controversy,
yeah.
And as an example of both perverse science, bad science. You had physics being done by chemists and results being announced at press conferences instead of in journals. There were all these bad signs, but the important thing was that they did publish their work. Half a dozen teams around the world immediately went to work trying to replicate it. Nobody replicated it, and cold fusion went away like that. COVID is an evolving situation, and so I think people in authority were trying to. I certainly saw it. We're trying to explain this is new science. The data is changing.
I didn't see that. I mean, I'm not saying it
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah,
exist, but I never saw the president stand up and say, any president, give
Well,
that
right,
understanding.
because part of the problem is how do you instill confidence on people who don't want to hear a science lecture? And so I don't think there's any answer to that. I don't really think there's some right answer to that. I think partly, the public health authorities are in a position not only of trying to do the best in terms of science, but part of the responsibility of public health officials is to communicate.
Right.
And to communicate these subtle ideas about science is not necessarily the most effective way to get the outcome that you want, which is to have everybody vaccinated.
Right.
Goddamn
It also doesn't engender a lot of trust in the population. What do you mean you don't know this?
Yeah, well,
So
exactly my
that's-
point. But that's exactly my point, and I don't know how you overcome that in the moment. In the larger question here, I mean, every generation says these kids today and their fucking music.
Get off my lawn.
And every generation says the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Now, having acknowledged that, I think it's also important to acknowledge that humans are not natural, rational thinkers. Critical thinking, rational inquiry, skepticism as we call it, the scientific method is not the way that human beings as biological animals are programmed to think. We, in fact, evolved and were programmed to think quite differently on the African plain when you have to learn to make quick assumptions and quick judgments and quick associations of cause and effect, which is to your survival advantage. And many of those biases that we are now programmed with are no longer to our advantage, right? We talk about cognitive biases all the time, but they don't come out of the air. They come out of this wiring. And we are constantly, the scientific method, which is a blink of an eye in the course of human history, right, is an unnatural way for humans to think. So we've always been bad at it, and we're not any better at it now than we've ever been before. Having said all that as sort of mollifying factors that I think you have to consider, I do think that the internet and social media has had unprecedented impact on worsening these things because it creates information silos where now, instead of being exposed to a consensus view, people seek out being exposed to their view, something that is constantly confirming, fueling their confirmation biases and makes them comfortable about their version of the world. And we see every day the insane things that people believe. There were always flat earthers, but the internet amplified those kinds of minority voices. And so I think that if you want to look at how the internet and social media made things worse, there's many ways they made things better. But, in an age of information, which is how history is going to see us, the most important skills are skills of selection, determining the difference between good information and bad information, and that is more easily said than done.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, we're victims of our own success, right? Because the scientific way we talk is based in provisional conclusions. And so people will often get locked in to those initial impressions and say, well, they said this. Well, yes, but there's a yes but after that.
Too, because skeptics
Indeed.
get obsessed with being right.
That's you're not wrong.
I mean, believe me, I've been in the skeptic community for 40 years. I can say it with some authority. Skeptics are overly obsessed with being right, and they could be thoroughly obnoxious about it.
You're so right. You
Jamie,
are so
I have a
right.
question based on what you just said.
Yes, sir.
Does getting fed information through internet and social media, I get it about, silos and all the bad parts about that. The other part about that is, does it actually change over time the way we think and approach information regardless? Are we just as capable of sitting down and reading a book for 2 hours now as we were 30 years ago?
I think those are great questions, Nick, and I'm sure your question is informed by the fact that that neuroscience and cultural social science are asking those same questions. That it's too soon to tell, but it is suspect. Like when you say American kids want to be influencers. So there's, when you unpack that, like that sucks. But when you unpack that, part and parcel of that is how do they get information, right? And I mean, TikTok is a news source for a generation. That's horrifying. So, and the outcomes of that are mostly bad, I think. But then there's the next layer are we rewiring kids' brains? This is a legitimate question. This is not me ranting, from a cultural standpoint. It's a legitimate question to ask. Are we rewiring our kids' brains by the way that they process information? There's certainly now some early data about the damage that smartphones and cell phones do if they're given the kids too early. I have, I have three sons. My 21-year-olds got to phones fairly early. Certainly got to social media. We're doing it again with my 14-year-old, and he has a flip phone so that he can call me for help, and I can find him, at the beach or whatever, and that's it. And he's just starting high school, and we are in no rush, Bob and I are in no rush for him to be on social media at all, because I don't think there's an upside.
I've got two different scientist friends in various types of studies with neurofeedback, and one said that he's wholeheartedly convinced. Now, of course, that's his own bias creeping in from his initial results, but he said every subject that he's had that is highly ADD and moving up the spectrum in autism, it's directly correlated to screen time. And he said that when you watch the screen, because he does the thing with all the electrodes on the head and monitors everything, and he said that screen time and the way that these short videos are set up, I don't remember which wave on the spectrum, but like beta waves or gamma waves, whatever, in your brain increase, which lull the brain and releases serotonin. And so it literally, like on this little screen all the time, lulls the brain to sleep, and it just starts to shut down the
So let me
processing.
understand. He is theorizing, and we'll emphasize this is
Right.
theorizing.
Yeah. There's no data
Don't
yet.
go running out saying, "Oh well, I heard that."
Right.
But so he is theorizing there's a cause and effect relationship between cell phone usage, social media, et cetera, the internet, and the uptick in ADD.
Yes. Yeah. He says that he has now again. There's no cause and effect. But there is correlation on a small sample size of several hundred.
Yeah.
And then another psychological scientist that works with neurofeedback saying the same thing, that doing these studies that as we're finding more and more people are having ADD and it's more widespread, that it's almost always associated with screen time. Just like now, he said that the difficulty is everybody's using more screen time. So you don't go into one of these studies if you're not having a problem, but you could be using the phone just as much as somebody else.
Right.
Where the interesting interesting studies are going to be is when they're looking at how does the brain function when you're not on your phone all day, as opposed to how does it function when you are on the phone, and if it changes, to your point, the way that your brain processes information, that's something we really need to know.
Okay, did I understand you correctly that as you're watching this, the indications are it sort of lulls your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna run that study with porn and see if you get the same answer.
So different
Well, the
areas
journey of a
will-
mile,
will-
of
you'll
a million
find
miles
different areas get
starts with
excited.
one step, Nick. So,
Okay.
um,
Who wants to volunteer for that
Science
study?
and-
Well, maybe
science at home. Yeah, I think
Science at
without
home.
getting too far off the track, because we're trying to talk here supposedly about critical thinking and bad information and misinformation and disinformation. I mean, I
Oh,
think it's,
porn is, there's no bad information in porn.
I think it's obvious that, you know, in generations to come, in decades to come, we're going to see real science that talks about the impacts of the internet and social media in a multitude of ways. Not we're here talking, I think, about the whole idea of information and how people get their information and information silos, and is that making critical thinking any worse than it is, or is it just the current iteration of how bad it's always been? But, you know, there's all sorts of other social science aspects of this generation of kids who are not social, right, and who socialize in completely different ways than previous generations. Than we did completely different ways, right? They don't physically get together. They, you know, they are having sex later. They drive later. There's all these interrelationships that have to do with the way they communicate and with the use of social media. So without, you know, the time will come and we're going to get more and more data about that. The question for us is dealing with the, you know, the current state of critical thinking or the lack of it. And I think there, a lot of it has to do with the amplification of bad ideas, right? Because there's more information that's both good and bad, right? No such thing as too much good information. But it does create these silos, these you know, that's not how we got the news in our day, right? It's not, you know, there was an inherent moderating factor in the fact that we were all watching one of three news reports at 7 o'clock, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
So, you know, there was a kind of inherent editorial guidance there, that today it's all about companies wanting clicks and companies selling advertising. Everything's a public corporation. In the days of, you know, when CBS was the great news organization, H.R. Murrow and all people like that, William Paley, who owned CBS, publicly said, we don't expect to make money on the news division, because guess what? The licenses for broadcast are supposed to be in the public interest. Remember that? All right. But and so you didn't look, it wasn't about making money. It was about doing a good job of providing news and using the wavelengths in the public interest. But public corporations they're neither inherently good nor bad, but they are obsessed with the stock price. And when the stock price defines everything, then clicks and advertising defines everything, and then you have this multitude of sources. And so all of this feeds these information silos where we know that people believe insane things, where ideas are put forward. We see it every day where ideas are put forward, and, you know, usually it's some idiot who's, you know, shot up a bunch of people and is either dead on sight or getting locked up. And then you find out what he believed, and what he believed is he's no longer one in a million. Okay, he's one of a whole subculture in a silo of information that thinks that, you know, Hillary Clinton is trafficking children at a pizza joint. I mean, that sounds like a joke, and instead it's a death sentence.
Yeah, I think there are a number of problems that come to the top with issues like this. Not the least of which is there's a difference between news and commentary, right?
Sure.
And we're getting a lot more commentary than we
Absolutely,
are
agreed.
news, and I think that is, and people call it the same thing. It's not.
And you know that one of the early, I think, damaging shifts there was, do you remember the days of the legal requirements of the fair and balanced?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now that went away after a while, but the hangover from that is that the news industry, again selling advertising, found out that conflict sells, right?
Oh, of course,
Conflict
yeah.
gets people on the screen, and they don't vet who the conflict is, and so it has long become a standard. This is not new, but if you read Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes, and I'm in the film, the documentary version of it. It's pointed out there that the role of the media in the concealment, essentially, the concealment of climate change, was in this kind of faux balance, where on the one side you'd have a scientist, a climatologist, talking about the subject, and because of this model of, well, we have to present two sides, you have some unqualified moron basically given the same platform. And, especially when we're talking about science, there are such things as experts. And we shouldn't be, debating. There's so much that's presented as, oh, well, there's two sides, when there's not two sides. There's not two sides to gravity, and there's not two sides to the existence of climate change. There's multiple sides as to what you want to do about it. But a lot of that came out of that fair and balanced thing, and then even when the law went away, the legal requirement went away on that, the networks, the news outlets, still hold to it because it creates clicks. But the speakers, the presenters, supposedly creating that balance, they're just creating conflict, and half of them typically are completely unqualified.
It's true. And then the other thing is that those people who are unqualified often will speak in with very strong conviction, and they're often very charismatic, and that is very persuasive to our brains. So I'm confident that you have observed that when you're trying to sell a disguise, that if you do it without conviction, then it will not be sold.
We always said, you can put the best disguise in the world on someone, and if they don't wear it with conviction, it doesn't work. It would never work.
Move up a little bit. Yeah. Was that you?
So across the board, I think what Jamie's saying, we all see it in our lives. I'm just sitting here reflecting on my son. He's 30. He's a musician who does IT in the day so he can pay his rent. And he's just disconnected from everything. He's not on Facebook. On his TV, he doesn't have any network programming. He has kind of backed off from all of those sources of information that I grew up relying on. Amazingly, he's still on top of what's going on in the world. And I can talk to him every day about, what's happening in Gaza, here and there. He's got opinions. I'm not sure where he's getting his information, but he's not getting it from the sources that I get my information on. And the other thing is that he spends an inordinate amount of time on games. Gaming seems to be the new focus of a lot of people of his generation, especially the male versions. I wonder what kind of an impact that has.
Well, Kurt, you have actually had several panels on that topic, on the gaming interaction with skepticism and information gathering.
So there's again, like, there's not, I forget who said it earlier, but it's dead on. Like, there's just nothing is inherently good or bad. It's how we use it. And gaming can be just a mind-numbing waste of time, or it can teach critical thinking. There's skills to be had by both online gaming and board gaming and tabletop gaming. We used gaming as a family because I've always been interested in games. So, back, I'll date myself with Dragon Con here. In 1990, Dragon Con held the first ever $5,000 cash prize Dungeons and Dragons tournament back in the Satanic Panic. And my home Dungeons and Dragons group actually ran that. I DM'd that tournament. And it was just like, my parents were horrified to find this D20 in my room. Like, I'm going to hell, oh my God,
Well, you grew up in this evangelical Christian sort of environment.
Sure.
So.
But I felt like it really added to my ability to think through and process information, that there's not one, it's just, most things in life is just not like one right way. So to analyze things and try to come up with, different ways to solve problems. So when we hit the road doing magic and traveling, at one point I have now performed live in all 48 continental states and like 9 countries. And my kids grew up in the back of a Suburban, pulling a magic show in a trailer, and so we homeschooled. But every homeschool I ever met was either like really, really, really smart or like no clue. And I like with my genes, their tendency to be toward the no clue, so we can't let this happen. And so I found that you can. There's now I have almost 400 board games now, and there's a board game for every theme and every type of thinking. And so what we aim to do is to supplement their education with games and learn different types of problem-solving skills. So I've got games that were geography-based and math-based, and games where it's social influence, where you have to negotiate your position in the game. And then we've got some where it's an engine builder, and you have to be the most efficient. And then you've got one where you have to work as a team, and so it's everybody's got everybody wins or everybody loses. And the brilliance of gaming, and this could be online gaming too, but it's tough as a parent or aunt or uncle or grandparent or however you're involved in helping the next generation. What we did is we kind of craftily used gaming as a reward for getting your schoolwork done, so that you learn, so you could learn some more.
Yeah.
And so we use the games to teach them more. And I have a special needs son, and my other 2 went to college on full scholarship. One of them should graduate with an architecture degree at the end of this semester. The other one is fully funded in his master's and is already talking to schools about doing fully funded PhD. So in spite of their genetic disposition, my kids are doing pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that's all great. I think your analogy about homeschooling is really good, actually. In terms of a way of thinking about gaming, I think it's hard for older generations to understand the gaming thing, and there's a huge difference between whether kids are playing, first-person shooters all day long, as opposed to, I advocated. We got my youngest a much more powerful computer some months ago, just before the summer, because he's a Minecraft lunatic, and I think it's really great for him because he's interested in coding. I think he's going to end up in something math or engineering or science or something like that. He's a math geek, and by getting him the bigger machine, he's now doing, I forget the actual game he's playing, but he's now obsessed with this game that's highly social. He's interacting. He has to work in teams, and it's a highly social thing, and it's a very critical thinking thing. So I think it's the same thing. And I admit it. I usually hate to say it because I make assumptions, but for various reasons, we homeschooled him for 1 year for 8th grade, because we knew that he was in a particular situation where he knew the teachers he was going to have, and he's a smart kid, and he knew he was going to have a miserable year. And we decided we don't want to inflict a miserable year on him, so we just pieced together a kind of part homeschool, part outer school thing for 1 year, just to suit him, and it was far more productive, I think, than if we left him in school. And at the end, we said, "Do you want to do that again?" And we were not planning on it. And he was like, "No, that was good, but I'm done." And and now he just started high school this week. So anyway, so it's easy to misunderstand gaming, and similar. I like your analogy that homeschooling, you can help produce, brilliant kids, or you can produce, morons who are just getting one piece of information.
So we throw around moron in society more than we probably should,
as opposed to ill-informed individuals who do not know how to critically think.
But the moron is exactly right in this situation. Okay. So I'll go like brief, and this shows again. We're so caught up in trying to find an answer now for things that are long term. Science is a long term process, right? There isn't an answer now. COVID was like one of the best, quickest. And it's so crazy with that is that to start out, they said if this goes right,
people are still going to die, but not as many. And we'll
Right.
get ahead of this and we'll get vaccinated. And so when it comes back, it won't be as bad because the strands are getting worse. That's exactly what happened. And people took the same information and say, you were wrong. You know, so it's so frustrating. But
Tell me about it.
The homeschool thing. So somebody I went to school with homeschooled their children who now homeschool. And I ran into them, and so we were talking, and just a delightful child, 8 years old, creative, inquisitive, and he saw me playing cribbage with somebody. And so cribbage is it's a very simple card game for two people, and it's a little math. So you're trying to find pairs or cards that total 15, and you're playing cards up to 31. So kind of you got an idea of where the math is. If you can add cards to 15, and you can make combinations, and then you're playing cards up to 31. And so that's all the calculations you're going to do. And he was just fascinated by this game, and he said, "Can you teach me that?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I'm like, "Here you go," because he's 8, right? So we deal the cards, and so I play a card. So I play a 3. He plays a 2, and he goes, "How much is that?" I'm like, "Well, so you're just adding the 2. 3 and 2 is 5. He goes, "You did that fast." And I'm like, "All right." So I play a 4. I say 9, and he's like, "No, it's a 4." And I'm like, "No, the total's 9." I said, "Now you play a card, and you'll add it to this total of 9." So I'm thinking it's like he's not getting what the process is. I find out he can't add. So I'm like, "All right, let me take 2 cards and put them out here." I said, "Hey, let's play a different game." So I put like a row of 5 cards. I said, "Turn 2 of them over and tell me what the total number of dots in all the cards are together." So he turns them over and is like, 7. And I'm like, "Yes, but you didn't add them, you counted." He goes, "Well, it's the same thing." Like, it's not the same thing, but you get the same answer. I'm glad you got 7. I said, I can't teach you this game till you learn how to add. And he goes, "Well, how do I do that?" Well, I can't say get a different mom. So I said, "All right." So because like at this point, it's clearly, and it's not his fault. His mom didn't take the effort and doesn't know how to teach him. Right? We forget you have to know how to teach somebody something.
Well,
And different kids are different, right? Jamie, your 2 probably don't learn the exact same way. Mine don't, right?
Right.
And so if you teach them the same way, your results are going to vary.
Right.
They're going to vary anyway. But
Yeah.
so I was trying to think in the moment. I don't have a lot of time here, and truthfully, I'm probably not making a difference, but I can't help but try. Like, this is a kid that wants to learn and has just no clue how to do that. And I said, I tell you what, this summer, because it was the beginning of summer, I said, play a game with your mom where she's going to show you any 2 numbers. And I don't want you to add, and I don't want you to learn the math. I want you to guess what you think the number is. And then if you're right, then like you get a piece of candy or a treat or whatever. And if you're wrong, you try another one. And just do this till you can guess what every one of them is right. So I'm not telling you like you got to just memorize these. So in his mind, memorizing them and guessing, that's the same thing. So I don't know if they're doing that, but he asked his mom if they could play that game this last summer. And I said, next time we get together, you and I will play this game, and if you guess the right answers for these, and you're going to do like 1 through 9, and then we're going to. So, anyways, if he learns his math facts just by rote memory, like it's better than not knowing math facts.
Religiously homeschooled. In a
Oh
religious
yeah,
home?
yeah, and to top it off, Alabama. So
Wow.
See,
I don't know
would've
if you know what the law is in Alabama, what your requirements are if you homeschool, because that's where I homeschooled mine, and I do. Anybody? If you homeschool your children in Alabama, you are legally required to turn in a report card that tells what their grades were for 6 to 8 subjects and write down how many hours they spent in the semester studying. That's it. You're not required for any particular subjects. You're not required to test them. They don't have to pass anything. I know a child that never once opened a book of any kind, got straight A's all through school, and when he wanted to go into college, took an entrance exam and tested in the bottom 5%.
Yeah.
And never made anything but straight A's, but never studied anything. Literally just he
And
played.
that's why they have entrance exams.
Yeah,
But
he
school
played a
inflation of
guitar and
grades
played
and-
video games all day. So the video games can be great, and they can just be a mind-numbing waste of time.
See, thinking of different teaching methods, I would have said, well, go get mommy's purse, let's count up what she's got in there, and work that way. Hey, you know what, we could come up with a game,
Yeah.
like exfiltrations. Get them out, you know, how to get out, you know.
Remember that game called Kim's Game? It came out of Kipling, where you'd have a tray full of things, small things, keys, fobs, little icons, and you'd give the kids, I don't know, 60 seconds, and then take it away, and then ask them to write what they saw, what was on that tray. That was always just powers of observation to teach you to look closely.
Right,
That's the only game I can remember that I want to talk about here.
some of the things at the office. Hey, I had a thought, Jamie, can I just throw in, because you were talking about the scientific method, and it suddenly kind of struck me, okay, take it a decade or two from now, does AI change the scientific method? Are we going to be at a point where AI comes back and says, Nick, that's a stupid hypothesis, because we've already seen that that's not going to work because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
You know, I mean, so much speculation about AI right now. I am not bullish about AI. I am far more concerned about the threats to the future that from AI. But when you talk about specifically the scientific method, I mean, I think I would like to think the dangers of AI have to do with allowing computers to think for you, and the problems are the ones that are perhaps less obvious, because it has to do with influencing decision making. This is the real danger of AI, is when you have serious decision making being influenced because people down the ladder and then subsequently up the ladder are using AI to help them make what seems like small decisions, and that climbs up the ladder. To me, this is the real hazard of AI. But I would like to think that on the scientific method side, that scientists are the ones least likely to allow AI to substitute for what we know is the scientific method by definition. I don't know that you can alter the scientific method, regardless. Science uses the power of computing to increase computation, but not to allow it to do its thinking. So I'm a little disinclined to think. I would maybe call it better to say I'm hopeful that that's not the area that AI will have a negative influence, but I'm very concerned about many other areas.
And you think like a generation or two from now, let's say 20 years, 30 years from now,
So I
What do you-
kind of see
I'm
where you're
kinda-
going here, right? So back with statistics, right? There was a generation who's like, using calculators for statistics is
Right.
a terrible idea. We need to do it all on paper. And now we're like, with computers, we can do statistical analyzation that we never could. And so we're like, well, it didn't hinder us thinking. It gave us more power to think more broadly. And it's because one generation wasn't familiar with computers and wasn't part of their life, and then later it just became, a part of everybody's life. And if AI does the same thing, is there 2 generations from now
But
going?
it's not. I think it's a terrible analogy. I think it's a really terrible
Well,
analogy.
we're speculating. Is will it be so ubiquitous that some generation will go, no, we can use this to do our thinking for us?
There's a difference between computation, the idea that a hand calculator today has more power. You hear this all the time, and it's true. Has more computational power than all the computers that sent Apollo to the moon. But that is raw calculation. That's math.
Right.
That's just more math, more betterer, more fasterer.
Right.
Okay?
Sure.
It's not thinking. It's not being mistaken for thinking. Nobody ever mistook it for thinking.
So do you think AI will expose our biases or get them more deeply entrenched?
I mean, AI is already making decisions.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know.
Right? So whether
Believe
it's
me,
corporate or military,
right.
it's already
I'm-
doing that.
I'm
So
aware.
you just
Yeah.
got to extrapolate a couple of decades from now and see where
Right,
it is.
and I think that's going to be bad.
Yeah. I just want to interrupt for just 1 second. We have a microphone here in the middle of the room. Please do not touch it or Mark will kill you. But it will adjust to your height. Don't worry. But we've got about a little less than 5 minutes left for questions. And this is a very intelligent crowd. So I'm certain we'll get some wonderful questions.
So we only have a couple
So-
of minutes, so if you can just keep those succinct,
Yep.
so that we can try and address.
Please.
And make
So,
it a
looks like we
question.
got one. Yeah. I can't sing George Rob's song, but hello. Question. Yes. Hi.
Yeah, so talking about influencers, being the mainstay focus and how they're influencing, for lack of a better word, against critical thinking. Do you think it's because the deck is stacked against critical thinking? Because a lot of the forces that are behind these influencers are so well organized and funded. For example, woo medicine, big supplements. People who do apologetics and stuff, they just call themselves a ministry and don't pay taxes. Skeptics, funded by, I don't know, BetterHelp. So, yeah, what do you think it's because of the resources behind bad thinking?
Anyone?
I don't think a 14-year-old thinks about the resources behind
Yeah, and
anyone. I think that's more ego-driven than, and I'm just shooting from the hip here. But I mean, my daughter had 2 million followers on TikTok and paid for part of her college, and actually dumped it when she was getting threats on TikTok. But so I don't
and
know.
what
I mean,
drove her success? What was her success built on, Nick? What was her area?
I mean, I would call moronic stuff. I mean, in my opinion, it's decorating your backpack.
Exactly.
But
See,
just like,
right,
what the
right.
hell?
So I don't think that's the issue. We're talking about children who,
Children is the point.
are right. We're talking about children, and they're talking about things that children talk about, right? And that's what they're influencing. And there's not much good about any of that, but yeah, I don't think it's about. It's not big pharma. That's not what the 12-year-olds are talking about.
Right.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. So just reminder, when you're at the microphone, make sure you're right up at the microphone because that feedback is because they have to turn up the volume to hear you. So, hello.
Hey, so as a mother of a, is this close enough?
That's better. They'll tell you.
Okay, as a former homeschool mom, closer?
I think further away.
Don't
actually.
touch it.
Yeah. He's moving it. There it is.
Okay, so we used a ton of video games as learning tools, but I heard you mention first-person shooters as not necessarily being useful, but they actually are. There's a ton of math and strategy involved
Yeah.
in FPS.
Yeah.
So don't discount necessarily all games that kids
Yes, I
play,
agree.
because they are useful. All of them can be useful. Any game can be useful. But Jonah, that memory game from when we were kids, we use those. They might be useful in Spycraft, but they're also, those are very useful memory games, especially for now as we're 50s. But we use those, and they're super fun. But I do remember those from when we were kids, remembering all those things on the tray.
Comes in handy sometimes.
Yeah.
I thought we
yeah.
used those in OTS.
But we did those when we were like little, 4, 5, 6, 7. I remember how many gloves, how many matchbooks, how many, or where was the compass, where was the pencil, or was there a, whatever on that tray.
By the way, they call that being a trained observer, and depending where you are in the government, I mean, you actually go through classes and training and stuff like that. In
Yeah.
fact,
Teaching you to look.
it's
to look.
It's
I've
a
also
skill you
done
can develop.
demonstrations where I've created a series of events that looks like an accident or something like that, and then asked people to report afterwards, mainly as an exercise in explaining to people why eyewitness testimony is the worst, and your memories are completely fluid and totally unreliable.
Absolutely. I was a trained SWAT medic, and I remember going through stop personal safety and doing all that, making sure that when you go into the scene, you don't get the big eye and not recognize this is my patient and that's a gun. So don't walk
And
in.
we,
Yeah.
we
Go for the
discovered
patient.
if you're looking down the barrel of a gun, somebody's pointing it at you, you will remember nothing
Yep.
except the barrel of that gun.
Exactly.
Oh, well, that
That's
is.
Yeah.
That, well, and that's an excellent point to end on. I'm sorry we're about out of time, but I want to give everybody about 15 seconds for shameless plugs. Margaret?
Yes, please sign up for the parade. You're going to have a blast, I guarantee it.
Thanks, Jamie.
My solo talk, Magic and Spycraft, is here at 1 o'clock today.
Excellent. Jonna?
This was a wonderful entry point for me into this Dragon Con. I can't wait to see what else is coming. I have a
Plug
book.
your books. Plug your books.
Oh, I got a book, In True Face,
In True Face.
A Woman's Life in the CIA. Nick was there. He knows.
Nick?
I'm not sure I know about a woman's life in the CIA, but
Ah.
yeah, no shameless plug, but just have some fun. Leave your cell phone home one day and just see how it affects you. See how you feel about it. I do all the time, just, testing it. And after you get past the first few days, it's interesting how it affects you. Have some fun.
Hey, I'm here all week. You'll see me.
Yep. And
Thanks for coming.
I forgot to introduce myself at the very beginning. I'm Dr. Angie. I'm a practicing emergency physician. I have a lot to say about how COVID was perceived in the media and by the patients. But thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Bye, Kurt. And thank you so much. We'll see you at our next talk. Bye-bye. Thanks.